obviously I can't preempt the discussions at the National Cabinet this morning, but what we want to see around the country is landlords and tenants working with each other to come up with fair and equitable ways forward. And there is the safety net that for those tenants who are impacted by the coronavirus and are experiencing financial distress because of the coronavirus are protected from eviction for 6 months. But obviously those tenants who are not affected should continue to pay their rent in the usual way. But it's really important here for landlords and tenants to work with each other and come up with sensible and pragmatic arrangements for the next 6-month period.
Do you support the freezing of land taxes and council rates?
Well, of course, there's a whole range of things that state governments and local governments could do, and no doubt these are the things that are being discussed as we speak.
The Australian Super Chief Ian Silk said this morning, Minister, that the government has seriously underestimated the number of people who will access super. He says 50 billion will be withdrawn, which is double the government projections. Has the government underestimated this?
Well, we don't believe we have, but only the future will tell. In any event, there is about $3 trillion, just under $3 trillion in Australian superannuation savings. Our advice is that super funds hold about $300 billion worth of cash. So even if Ian Silk is right and this is what happens, this is still only a very small component of what is held in superannuation, and in particular what is held by superannuation funds in cash. And APRA, the prudential regulator, has clearly advised us that this is easily feasible for superannuation funds around Australia without causing any difficulties whatsoever.
So he could well be right, though.
Well, an estimate is an estimate. So, his estimate is his estimate. We are relying on Treasury's estimate. Treasury's estimate is that this would involve about $27 billion in superannuation savings being accessed early. We've got to remind ourselves, when this only formalizes an existing scheme, we've already got a scheme where you can access superannuation early on the hardship provisions, and we've just made very clear that these hardship provisions can apply in an efficient manner in this context. And I think that all Australians who look at this objectively would agree that this is an appropriate circumstance to give people access to their superannuation, to a proportion of their superannuation under hardship provisions.
Okay, Minister, just now on the sheer amount of money that's been spent from the government over the past week or so, it is all patch-up jobs that have had to be arranged fairly quickly. How on earth do you unwind all of this once it's all over?
Well, all of these things that we're doing are temporary. They're not structural. They are put in place on a time-limited basis. And in terms of the legislation that puts all these things in place, it's sunsetting legislation which will come to an end. There'll be an opportunity to be somewhat flexible depending on how long this takes. As the Prime Minister has said, we expect this to take at least 6 months. Could well be a little bit longer, so there's an opportunity at the edges to extend this a bit. But fundamentally, this is all temporary. It's not structural. It's not baked in to our budget projections over the medium term. So
rather than a hard snapback, as the Prime Minister referred to yesterday, it'll be a gradual easing?
Look, we expect a significant bounce back on the other side of this, and we are prepared to make the necessary judgments depending on how this unfolds. One of the key features of all this is it's been very hard to predict from one week to the next, how the health and the economic side of this continues to evolve, and the government has shown flexibility in adapting and amending and adjusting our response to the coronavirus impact as clearly the impact has evolved. And that's what we'll continue to do. But hopefully at the end of 6 months, there'll be the opportunity to return back to normality. And on the back of a bounce back, we certainly would expect all these temporary measures to fall away.
But you've got 6 months as a reasonable timeline there. But could it be 12 months or could it even be 18 months? Because really, you're not going to be able to stop these restrictions until there's a vaccine.
Well, look, I don't have a crystal ball. I certainly don't expect it to be 12 or 18 months based on what we know now and based on what we've been able to observe, I guess, overseas.
But it could, though. It could.
Well, you know, a lot of things could or couldn't. I mean, you know, you can't. I mean, I can't speculate for you, you know, through a crystal ball gazing exercise. Based on the experience that we've observed overseas, we believe our assessment is that, you know, the 6-month window is the most likely scenario, but we will continue to obviously monitor and adjust our response, you know, as events unfold.
Will the debt ceiling have to be raised again?
Look, I mean, these are things for us to assess as things move forward. I mean, right now, we've already, of course, increased the debt ceiling to $850 billion as part of, you know, recent announcements, and we'll continue to monitor that even as appropriate. These decisions will be made.
That could go to $1 trillion?
Well, again, I'm not going to speculate.
Okay, well, I mean, you're going to have to come up with some radical measures, I would have thought, to be able to pay down this debt. I mean, the Treasurer has already said this week that it is going to take a long time to be able to pay this off. So where do you start here? I mean, will we have to increase taxes?
Well, I mean, that would be precisely the wrong thing to do. What we have to do is to make sure that our economy bounces back strongly and that we have increased revenue flows again on the back of a strongly growing economy. But just to put the debt situation in context, I mean, yes, I mean, when we were forecasting a surplus in the 2019-20 budget time last year, it was going to take all of the next decade to pay off government net debt back down to zero. And, you know, we've since then, you know, incurred significant additional expenditure. We're clearly not going to be in surplus. We're going to be in deficit for at least, you know, the next few years. So clearly, I mean, that there's going to be a delay in the trajectory getting back to zero government net debt. But, I mean, the best way to get back into a stronger fiscal position is by making sure the economy has the best possible opportunity to grow strongly on the other side so that we can maximise the level of revenue generated through that process.
Okay, well, the changes to GST and franking credits more certain.
Sorry, what sort of changes?
So would there have to be changes? Would changes to GST or franking credits, would that be more certain than raising taxes?
No. Well, no. I mean, we've been very clear. I mean, whatever way you want to describe it, we're not going to start pushing for increased taxes. Whatever technical terms you want to put around it, that is not on the cards. Okay. The best way to get the budget back into a strong position on the other side is by getting the economy in the strongest position on the other side, by getting Australians working again and paying income tax. That is the way, and obviously by being able to spend less on the back of more Australians back in work and not requiring the access to job seeker payments. And I say again, I mean, the commitments that we've made are temporary. They're not structural. They're not baked into the budget. We had a strong and sustainable budget trajectory before all of this happened, and, you know, clearly, you know, we would fully expect to get back onto that trajectory once we've gone through this temporary period.
Okay, there's more and more people calling for people in the public sector to take pay cuts. Should MPs have to take pay cuts?
Well, we've made a decision to freeze salaries in the current context. I've written to the Remuneration Tribunal urging them to freeze, you know, pay rates. I'm not sure how you know, this sort of suggestion would help in the context of the budget challenge. I mean, it's essentially at the margin, and you know, I think that MPs and public servants are working very hard right now, obviously, to work through this period.
How long would that freeze last for?
Well, these decisions are made on a yearly basis, and I mean, the Remuneration Tribunal and the Australian Public Sector Commission does make these sorts of decisions independently, but we've certainly indicated that for this year there shouldn't be an increase. Just
over in your neck of the woods, Minister, the Premier will be closing the borders on Sunday. Are you going to be right to make it to Canberra next week?
Yes, I mean, I'm having, you know, obviously regular engagement with the Premier here in Western Australia, coordinating federal and state matters, and appropriately the government here in Western Australia has provided that federal members of Parliament from Western Australia are essential workers for Western Australia and are exempt from the ban under the essential worker exemption.
Okay.